Okay, greetings to everyone in attendance. It's already 6 o'clock, but we are still waiting for the other presenters for tonight's affair. So let's just wait for a couple more minutes before we begin. Thank you for coming and welcome to the work in progress for the month of November. All right, so it's already 6:05 on my clock, and I think we can begin now. So we welcome you all to the Department of Philosophy under the Faculty of Arts and Letters to the fourth Work in Progress seminar for the second semester of this academic year. Before I give you our presenters for today, let us first read the department's policy on safe spaces. As defined, safe spaces is a place or environment in which a person or category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other emotional or physical harm. The Department of Philosophy commits itself in providing safe spaces for its faculty members, students, and guests. As such, the following policies are put in place. Commitment to recognize the individual gender preferences of its members. The said gender preference must not be used against any individual. His or her ideas and judgments must be taken without any bias. Commitment to speak with prudence. Members of the department are expected to act with prudence, thereby avoiding actions that may lead other members to feel uncomfortable. In accordance with the Safe Spaces Act, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic statements and slurs, the persistent telling of sexual jokes, the use of sexual names, unwanted sexual, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks and comments online must not be tolerated. Commitment to act according to stature. As faculty members, students, and learned individuals, we are expected to act according to our stature. Actions that may lead to committing any form of harassment shall warrant necessary sanctions as stated by the law and the university policies. As stated in the Safe Spaces Act, relentless request for one's personal details, unwanted comments to appearance, cursing, terrorizing, and intimidating victims through physical, psychological, and emotional threats, cyber stalking, invasion of the victim's privacy, and attempt to silence the victim are examples of violations punishable under the law. Teachers and students are expected to act in accordance to RA 11313 or the Safe Spaces Act, an act defining gender-based sexual harassment in streets, public spaces, workplaces, and educational or training institutions. Members of the department are reminded at all times that any violation of the aforementioned provisions is punishable under the law and existing university policies, rules, and regulation. You may refer to the stated link for a detailed discussion of the law. And now, this particular point, I think it would be proper for me to introduce our presenters for tonight's seminar. First would be Joseph Mary Nuqui, with this paper, Magbigay, ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha, batay sa pangangailangan, a Rancièrian reading of Community Pantries, to be followed by Beljun P. Enaya, with his paper, Philosophizing from the Farmer's View. After him, we have Dr. Franz Giuseppe Cortez, with his paper, Arithmomaniac, Education in the Metric Society, the Role of the School in the Quantification and Cult. And of course, we will end with Dr. R.T. Pada's paper, New Forms of Fascism. Now, with no more ado and without further gilding the lily, I give you Joseph Mary Nuqui with his paper, again, Magbigay ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha, batay sa pangangailangan, a Rancièrian reading of Community Pantries.
Thank you, Sir Eric. Again, good evening to all of you. Allow me to share my screen now. All right. Is my screen now visible?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. So, what I'll be presenting for tonight is my abstract, then a brief background of the study and my research design. And now I begin. Again, my working title is Magbigay ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha batay sa pangangailangan, a Rancièrian reading of Community Pantries. This thesis aims to read the phenomenon of community pantries using the Rancièrian lens. I argue that community pantries present a case to establish the connection between perception and action, helps recover an alternative vision of politics, one that is more participatory, and how they become part of the sensible distribution as a form of desensual activity. Initiated by Anna Patricia Non, community pantries are a response to the limited resources caused by the pandemic. The exponential growth of these pantries highlighted what some have seen to be inadequate government response, and as such, its growth is not without political scrutiny. The communal effort brought about by community pantries was either welcomed as it provided an avenue to help those in need, or was monitored by the military due to its similarity to communist and socialist sentiments, and thus left a disparity between various perceptions of community pantries. In this light, one sees the political capacity of aesthetics broadly and perception specifically to foster alternative ways of doing and thinking rooted in communal actions that encourage participation even beyond times of crisis. After a series of evolving, confusing, repetitive lockdown classifications, alongside the closure of economic and commercial activities, millions of Filipinos lost their jobs and sources of income. More than a year into this COVID-19 pandemic, many have suffered physically, psychologically, and financially. As reports show, both on the local and national scale, leaders and citizens struggle to balance health and economy. History tells us that when people are not satisfied with how their leaders handle crisis, they usually resort to loud protests and rallies to challenge, awaken, and show displeasure at their leaders. However, around mid-April of 2021, the Philippines witnessed not rallies and loud protests, but silent outbursts of generosity. Through the initiative of Ana Patricia Non, a local entrepreneur who worked with farmers and vendors, a community pantry emerged, bannered under the motto, "Kumuha ayon sa pangangailangan, magbigay ayon sa kakayahan." The makeshift bamboo cart filled with essentials has inspired many and has sparked hope in many Filipinos in the time of the pandemic. To everyone's surprise, community pantries grew exponentially in different parts of the country. The concept of the community pantries is simple. Give what you can, take what you need. However, in its simplicity, it also conveys compelling ideas. Underlying the saying is charity, solidarity, and mutual aid. As Non asserts in several interviews, portraying these community pantries in these principles invigorate acts of service. Although the objectives were to provide assistance, establish solidarity and mutual aid, and normalize kindness, others have interpreted community pantries as being inspired by socialist or communist ideas, thus considered anti-government in intention. Such perspectives are interpreted by a system that directs what is deemed proper to normal, thereby preferring one perception or interpretation over others. The community pantries do not only provide at the grassroots, but they also present an opportunity to establish deeper connections grounded on altruism. Due to quarantine restrictions, people's movement are limited, thus confining them to whatever places they inhabit. However, despite being placed in their living spaces, the pandemic has provided them the opportunity to be alone and recognize the suffering of others. Perhaps this solitude and sensitivity to others' needs are what drove them to also participate in the establishment of community pantries. The spontaneous emergence of community pantries led people to rediscover their sense of community pantries in relation to space in four general ways. First, community pantries are spaces where people organize themselves to provide and exchange goods for the needs of those within their localities. Thus, community pantries are actual sites of gathering. Second, community pantries, though concerned with the needs within their respective communities, also receive donations or aid from various direct suppliers established by contact. There is a broader connection between people and their network of relationships. Community pantries are thus spaces of connection as well. Third, community pantries, through their objectives to establish solidarity and mutual aid, invite others to share what they can. Because of that atmosphere, community pantries are a space of invitation to make room for the needs of their neighbor. Lastly, community pantries, by building up our localities through connections, lead people to rediscover and renew their sense of community, both in the specific space of their setting and the space of their networks. Thus, community pantries are spaces of renewal. The preceding notions illustrate the inherent connection between people, spaces, and the perceptions that they have established within those relations. This highlights the political impact of community pantries and shows how spaces are delimited within urban sensibilities. Moreover, it presents alternative modes of action on how to go beyond these delimitations. In this context, I will use Jacques Rancière's analysis on the interaction of politics and aesthetics. The question of action is always limited by what can be perceived. Thus, recourse to alternative modes of action, albeit unpredictable, rests on changing perspectives by what is rendered invisible by current regimes of power. Thus, this thesis aims at contributing three things. First, an analysis of the phenomenon of community pantries via a Rancièrian lens establishes the connection between perception and action, which broadens and emphasizes the interplay of politics and aesthetics. The link between perception and action has ontological, epistemological, and ethical components, since it is concerned with perceptions of subject, their knowledge acquisition, and their capacity to make decisions. Second, this thesis helps recover an alternative participatory vision of politics, contrary to the tradition following Plato and Aristotle. Rancière continues to push his readers to redefine their notion of democracy. By employing his discussion and the construction of the term, it opens an avenue for people to rediscover their sense of community through expanding the circle of players, that is, political subjects, and not merely spectators. Lastly, this study also brings an intersection with philosophy of the city in relation to the use of city spaces in general. Community pantries create an opportunity to maximize spaces within the community to be actual sites of gathering, helping people rediscover their connections and renew a space within their urban sensibilities. To illustrate a reading of community pantries via a Rancièrian lens, this paper is structured into 5 chapters. The following is the overall framework. Chapter 1 lays out the overall structure of the research, provides reader an overview of the study, gives a review of related literature, and presents the research design. Chapter 2 and 3 will be descriptive and expository in approach as it aims to provide a general understanding of Rancière's politics and aesthetics. The second chapter, Rancièrian politics, is guided by the question, what is Jacques Rancière's politics? A reading of his disagreement, Politics and Philosophy, highlighting its first 2 chapters, The Beginning of Politics and Wrong, Politics and Police, will guide the discussion of the chapter. I begin the second chapter with a discussion of the beginning of politics found in Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Politics. Since Rancière is framing politics differently, there needs to be a clarification on what vision of politics he's commenting against. He often returns to the political canon of the 2 Greek philosophers. Thus, they will be touched, but not extensively and merely for scaffolding Rancière's inquiry. After the establishment of Rancière's position and discussion of politics, follows a discussion of the wrong and the police. The police functions in such a way that it frames proper ways of seeing, establishing the norm of the correct action while cracking down on other perceptions. By normalizing perceptions, the police solidifies interpretations of images, confining and limiting our alternative visions of action. These 2 concepts are vital elements supporting his political theory. The last section of the second chapter discusses political subjectivation, which is an essential feature of his political theory. The chapter ends by elaboration through following the discussions that transpired in the previous sections, why politics for Rancière is a process of political subjectivation. In chapter 3, Rancière and the relationship between aesthetics and politics, I mainly discuss the link between aesthetics and politics. The inquiry that would guide the third chapter is, what is the relationship between Rancière's aesthetics and politics? Rancière links aesthetics to politics through what he calls the distribution of the sensible. It pertains to other modes of perceiving, doing, and saying, involving various individuals in the social and political realm. Thus, I begin the third chapter by elaborating on this concept. Following this discussion is an account of what Rancière meant by aesthetics of politics. Rancière has a specific definition of aesthetics. He contends that there is an element of aesthetics in politics, since aesthetics for him is the common perception of the world. We are capable of perceiving what he calls the distribution of the sensible, and in this sense, aesthetics is politics. The last section of the third chapter is an elaboration of the politics of aesthetics. Rancière talks about this in relation to the aesthetics regime of arts. He discusses how aesthetics has evolved and how new aesthetic experiences have developed and shaped our thinking about politics or the distribution of the sensible. After presenting Rancière in chapters 2 and 3, the fourth chapter, a Rancièrian reading of community pantries, attempts to give a Rancièrian reading on the phenomenon of community pantries, mainly describing how they emerged and the problems that surfaced. after which I discussed the different perspectives circulating the said phenomenon. By adopting the position of Rancière's politics and aesthetics vis-a-vis a broad presentation of the different motivations that led to the emergence of community pantries, I aim to show what other perspectives are possible that is not within the purview or is rather hidden with the current narrative that shifts our perception of what is important. The whole discussion of the fourth chapter is guided by the question, how does draft Rancière's politics and aesthetics shed light on the phenomenon of community pantries? To frame the possibility brought about by a Rancièrian perception, community pantries will be discussed vis-a-vis Rancière. First, I argue that contrary to some perceptions of community pantries, these reactions reinforce ideas that limit our very outlooks as subjects. As a result, perceptions affect our actions and therefore have ontological, epistemological, and ethical implications. Second, by drawing out the political stakes of the connections exposed by the community pantries between space and people, I argue that it presents an alternative vision of politics. This vision is more participatory in the sense that it extends the status of political subjects by allowing individuals to voice themselves out while remaining attentive to both verbal and action cues. And third, I argue how the community pantries became part of the sensible distribution as a form of desensual activity. The sudden emergence of community pantries made people realize that they have the capacity to do something. The fourth chapter encapsulates the mechanisms through the Rancièrian lens to foster ways of doing and thinking in communal actions that encourage participation even beyond the times of crisis. Lastly, chapter 5 supplies a summary of the study, the conclusion, and some recommendations for further development. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir MJ. Now, at this juncture, we are now welcoming your comments and questions for our first presenter, Sir MJ Nuqui. You can also put your comments and questions in our chat box, and we will be reading it. Dr. Paolo Bolaños is raising his hand. Yes, Doc.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Salamat, Joseph, no? Or how do you like to call us to call yourself, MJ?
At MJ na lang po, Doctor.
Okay. Yeah, it's nice that because we had a conversation before about your thesis when you were when you were looking for a suitable advisor, and I hopefully that already worked out for you, no? And I'm glad that I was able to see because I wasn't able to see the flow of your proposed study. And I'm glad that I was able to see how you plan to go about the research. So yeah, the first thing I'd like to say is that I think based on what you presented, it seems like it's clear to you what you want to do. Although of course we will have to read to read a more elaborate or a more developed paper or thesis, so in order for us to see how your grasp of Rancière, or how adequate your grasp of Rancière is. But it seems to me that at least in the presentation that you shared with us, that you've already identified some of the key concepts, key Rancièrian concepts that that will play out in your work, no? So that's what the first thing that I could say. It seems like claro, no, clear yung gusto mong gawin, no? uh, you're also lucky that there are people in the department who are actually reading Rancière. We have, of course, Dr. Darlene, and we also have Jesse, Lino, and Dr. Elicor also, right? So, hindi ka mawawalan ng kausap. Now, I don't really have a question. Just want to commend you first for the clarity. And I will. I'm not a. I read Rancière, but I'm not a Rancièrian scholar. And so I would defer to Dr. Demandante and Jesse and Peter for the the more in-depth discussion or in-depth questions regarding Rancière. Another thing that I noticed in the way you presented your proposal is the way you. Ewan ko napag-usapan ba natin to when we had that meeting, that you have to be that you have to write your the resource design of your work without pretending to be Rancière, right? Yung parang you have to simply present or you have to simply write your research design in the clearest way possible, and I think you did that. I appreciated the flow of the research design. No, it seems to me that the logical progression will actually bring you to the goal or the outcome of the intended outcome of your research. So I'd just like to say that, and kasi kanina walang nagre-raise ng hand, so I wanted to start the conversation. That's why I raised my hand. So I defer now to the others who might have more in-depth or substantial questions, and maybe in the course of the exchange I will have other questions as well. Thank you very much, MJ.
Thank you po,
Sorry, MJ, do you want to respond, or should we move on to the next question? Okay, I think
it's up to MJ if he wants to say something.
Well, I would just like to thank you, Doc Pauna, for your guidance then in first of all in finding a suitable advisor for my thesis, and second for taking the initiative to give us graduate students that last webinar on how to write our thesis proposal. It did really help me writing my chapter 1. I employ the tips you've given us by structuring the chapter 1 with 3 sections, namely the overview of the study, the literature review, and the research design. And for that, I'm really grateful. Thank you po.
Just quickly, in addition, what I wanted to in that seminar, what I wanted to tell the students, tell you, graduate students, you did not write a convoluted, complicated framework. You just have to describe what you're doing, in the simplest terms possible. In that way, you also avoid unnecessary complications. Kasi there's the tendency nga na you complicate the presentation of your research design by calling it this or calling it that, and so on. No? So the simpler the presentation of the research design, the better. And don't worry about jargon, because jargon will just come later on from your writing, even the research design will be informed by how in-depth your understanding of Rancière or any philosopher. No? Kaya the key terms will emerge there. Will inevitably will have to refer to some key terms that are let's say specifically Rancièrian. Pero hindi mo kinakailangang paghalo-haluin yung mga jargon, no? Para lang magmukhang legitimate or acceptable yung research design. The point is to make your readers understand exactly what are you doing exactly. What's the flow of your study, no? So ako kung ibabase ko sa iyong present, you want to talk about the phenomenon of community pantries, and then there's this Rancière that Rancière offers some guiding philosophical tools, no, to understand the phenomenon. At saka rare kasi rin na rare yung philosophy thesis or article na would venture into something very specific and very specific, like the phenomenon of community pantries and how that specificity would be maybe understood in the context of philosophy. Kung minsan there's this lopsidedness na nangyayari kasi karamihan gustong magsulat ng, pero maganda kasi yung napili mo, siguro nagkataon maganda yung pinili mong hindi yung kuminsan kasi yung mga pinipili ng mga student kung ano lang yung uso, no, na no. Pero community pantries, I think there are things that we can learn from the phenomenon. So anyway, I'll stop talking now, but maybe in the course of the exchange, I will raise my hand again. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc Pao. Now let's listen to Sir Jesse.
Hi, hello, thank you, Eric. See MJ. First of all, MJ, this is actually a good research topic. In fact, I agree with Dr. Bolaños that the very research design itself clearly provides us the very direction of your research work. The trajectory itself is clear enough for us to understand where does it come from, and at the same time, the initial point of departure for which your research would actually lead us towards its upcoming fruition. In fact, I'm not even sure if this is a question, but rather an advice in terms of the method you are using. Definitely, Rancière did not talk about community pantries, and at the same time, perhaps even community pantries not being aware of Rancière's philosophical enterprise. But one of the first few challenges of siguro, for lack of better description, an appropriation type of research is, of course, to also recognize that the theories we are using or the philosophical enterprises that we are using possesses certain limitations as to, well, as indicated in the very distance of the very topics we are talking about. And as mentioned, Rancière definitely did not talk about community pantries, but perhaps we could learn from him about reading or perhaps examining the phenomenon of these community pantries. Your research is clear in terms of its elaboration of lessons from Rancière that we could actually learn from upon our reading of community pantries. But you also have to realize that sometimes Rancière is not enough. Meaning to say, there are limitations of Rancière's theories when you directly apply it in certain phenomenon he did not talk about, such as, of course, one of which is, of course, the community pantries. It's not just about the phenomenon being read from the lenses of a philosopher or a philosophical enterprise, but also at the same time, the philosophical enterprise itself testing its applicability to a specific phenomenon. So you would also have to highlight siguro yung parang limitations ng theories ni Rancière in the phenomenon of community pantry, so as to not give siguro a certain injustice on our part, kasi on our part as a certain injustice on the part of the community pantries, parang without reference to such without reference to Rancière's possible reduction of the phenomenon of community pantries in accordance to his philosophical enterprise. And I'm quite sure even Rancière wouldn't like that. Kasi his despise against the authority of theory over certain phenomenon or social phenomenon is something that Rancière wouldn't like to, of course, to happen in your research. And siguro yun nga, since we're talking about the limitations also of Rancière in the phenomenon of community pantries, actually it's a good thing that you've mentioned certain elements that would perhaps help you or guide you in developing the limitations also of Rancière's philosophy or Rancière's political theory, which is of course coming from the insights of sabihin natin yung philosophy of the city or the philosophy of urban spaces. You've mentioned a while ago that urban spaces, you're going to work on this certain discipline. Am I correct?
Yes po.
Yeah. That's actually a nice, that's actually a nice way of developing yung parang limitations ni Rancière. Because of a lot of thinkers today, as I could perhaps mention Bill Marshall or Tim Jarvis, or Caroline Stidman actually, and Sabine Procoris. They were thinkers who actually thought of the limitations of Rancière when applied to the study of the urban spaces. Since an example of which is, well, I could perhaps name it, and you would rather talk about it on the fruition of your thesis. One of the few things that limits Rancière's idea of politics is, well, for Rancière, politics is the introduction of new sensibilities, or the disruption of the old sensibilities by introducing new forms of sensibilities, new forms of existences, etc., etc. But when community pantries existed, I'm not sure if it's a new sensibility, but it's rather siguro a refamiliarization of the lost communal values we have when the urban spaces were still at least there was no rigid distinction between the rural and the urban spaces, because if you go to the provinces, if you go to places beyond the city, the community pantries are not new. In fact, they were already being practiced years before. They were even practiced in places outside, let's say, Metro Manila. You go to perhaps, if I'm mistaken, go to Region 3 or perhaps Region 4A. There are a lot of places there that already practices community pantries. So this is something that, siguro it's a technical, it might look like as if it's a technical problem, but perhaps Rancière's politics might also have limitations, and it's not just about community pantries learning something from Rancière. It's also at the same time Rancière learning something about our community pantries. So maganda siguro i-highlight mo rin yun, so as to not give justice on our part here in the Philippines na lagi na lang foreign theory perhaps yung ginagamit natin, but perhaps certain limitations of their theories are being called upon or being revealed as in this form in the attempts to look into certain phenomena such as the community pantries. Well, as mentioned, you could work on, is it really introduction of the new sensibilities, or perhaps a refamiliarization of the lost communal values we have when we started organizing into cities, or we started organizing rural spaces, or rather urban spaces. Since if you go to the city, definitely wala talagang lugar para mag-gather. Konti lang plaza. At perhaps the places to gather are, unfortunately, the malls and even perhaps at the church. I'm not sure. If you're going to notice, ganun, doon natin makikita actually yung parang the peculiar way of looking into how people attempt to gather within cities. Yeah, the community pantry is one of them. It's surprisingly, it's a good thing, no? That we organize this, but it's not to introduce new sensibilities. I'm not sure if it's new, because I'm quite sure it's not. It's rather a refamiliarization of the lost communal values that are still alive and more being practiced at the rural spaces or the provincial or places outside the urban spaces. So yeah, you could perhaps learn something or two from what I've said. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Bolaños. No, the research is very clear enough. In fact, despite that you did not mention your significance of the study, this is actually a good way of, I don't know, one of the good starting points of, let's say, messianically abolishing NDF-LCAC. No? Sige, yun lang.
Thank you so much po, Sir Jesse.
Yeah, thank you rin.
Okay, thank you so much for your comments and the recommendations, Sir Jesse. Now let's listen to Sir Kevin, and then after that we'll listen to Dr. Raniel Reyes' comments or questions. Sir Kevin, please.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Una, thank you for the presentation. Natuwa ako kasi ang dali niyang sundan. Even for someone like me who's not really familiar with the ideas of Rancière. But when you presented it, unlike sa ibang papers or pag may conference kami natin, yung alam ko, ano yung namang sandalan ng gustong gawin ng speaker. So, na-appreciate ko yung clarity and organization ng thesis that, or at least yung flow ng thesis that you presented. So, one of the questions that I have, siguro for context, I'm working in the government, specifically sa office ni VP Lenny. And nung nangyari yung phenomenon ng community pantries, syempre, yung initial idea doon was that it was organized by a specific community, di ba? Yung mga tao dun sa komunidad magbibigay kung anong kaya nila, and yung mga mas nangangailangan kukuha batay nga dun sa pangangailangan nila. So definitely this raised some alarms sa security perspective. When I say security perspective, we can even think of it as two ways. Siyempre yung na-feature lang sa media, yung sa mga komunista yung gumagawa niyan, di ba? Recruitment tactic. So that's one. Yung second naman is community pantry, and it happened during the height of the pandemic. So there were, I think, legitimate concerns in terms of observing safety protocols. Lalo kung nagiging cause siya ng mass gatherings, no? And hindi na na-observe yung social distancing. So in terms of a health security perspective, yung third na framework or third na perspective na nakikita ko is masasabi ba natin na yung ideya ng community pantry ay nadi-distort kung yung mga organizers ng community pantries ay humihingi ng mga nagsosolicit ng mga donasyon mula sa iba't ibang mga institusyon, no? Kasi if the initial idea of the community pantry is that you source it from organic members of the community, does it distort the concept of the community pantry if, let's say, the organizers request from the local government, the organizers request from private companies, the organizers request from government offices or politicians? Kasi from our experience, when there were community pantries that were occurring, our office received a lot of requests to give donations, no? And of course, we know naman na they're meaning well, no? And of course, the organizers are asking for donations precisely because they have limited resources. But when you introduce elements outside of the initial community or the organic community, of course, there are questions that arise na is this really the community? Is this really how we execute the idea behind the community pantry when we're basically looking for patrons or sponsors? So, and of course, it's all entirely possible for local politicians up to national government politicians to utilize community pantries as sites of campaigning. For example, isang komunidad, homeowners association, nag-organize sila ng community pantry, may sila ng tulong kay kagawad o kay barangay captain, tapos ginawa ng political event yun. Diba? If the idea of giving food, no, parang is still there, but there's a clear element of politicking behind it because it still meet the idea of the community pantry. So siguro dito yung from a practitioner's perspective, how parang nakikita ko kasi meron kang ideal na ang community pantry dapat ganito, but in practice, it's very prone to being co-opted by different actors in any setting, whether by invitation, yung organizers yung lumapit at humingi, or yung mga, let's say, politiko, mga kumpanya, yung lumapit dun sa organizer saying they want to donate. So, how, siguro yung tanong ko lang naman dito is, baka in your study, you can also explore how those realities would affect, kasi kumbaga, even community pantries are not one size fits all. And yung nilagay ko dun sa chat is, we have one phenomenon, no, that could take on different forms depending kung saan siya gagawin. But the discourses or the frames, kung paano frame yung community pantry is presented in different types. It could be negative, kung militar ka, no? It could be siguro somewhere in between, kung medical practitioner na you're concerned na maging cause of surge siya. It could be parang a feel-good story, no? From a media perspective, it could be a political opportunity for certain groups, no? So, from one phenomenon, different perspectives, different discourses, and you have the overall context of the pandemic na sabihin natin, kaya nagka-community pantry kasi hindi yung maasahan yung gobyerno. Pero lumapit tayo sa mga government agencies. Paano natin may interpret yung mga ganung realidad dun sa konteksto nung paper na sinusubukan mong gawin. So, katulad din nung nabanggit ni Jessie, hindi ko kasi hindi ako familiar kay Rancière, so hindi ko alam kung may enough conceptual tools that his framework will make available, but baka that's also something na you can consider. What role does power play in terms of not just yung power of the actors involved, but the power in terms of how the community pantry as a phenomenon is shaped by different discourses. Anong diskurso about the community pantry yung nananaig sa kaisipan ng mga taong kabilang nito, sa mga tao sa sabi natin mas malawak na lipunan? And I think maganda rin yung nabanggit ni Jessie na the community pantry seems so novel kung taga Metro Manila ka. Kasi hindi sanay sa kultura, at least sa nakasanayang kultura na magbigayan tayo, di ba? Kung may kailangan ka, bilhin mo. Pero sa ibang lugar, hindi ganoon yung konteksto. Kukunin ko sa K-drama, ito nga yung charm ng hometown cha-cha-cha, di ba? So, yun, wala naman akong specific na tanong or guidance, pero baka ma-consider mo lang yung mga ganong aspects from the perspective of someone who's sabihin natin na as a practitioner rather than an academic. So, yun. Thank you.
Alright. Thank you po, no, Sir Kevin. Siguro na kahit walang specific na tanong, I would also like to share my sentiments kasi there's one perspective that you gave regarding on the question of the sustainability of community pantries. Am I right? So this question of sustainability is a crucial aspect of the phenomenon. Mainly because um, if magiging strict lang talaga tayo sa motto nila, it would imply na they should operate by choice, right? Rather than because people are obliged to do so. So the community pantry was not meant to be something permanent from the get-go. The way I see it, um, it was supposed to be a way for those who have the means to help. Siguro kaya rin may like pangit man yung word, solicitations or paglapit sa mga private institutions. Kasi from the start, alam naman yata talaga ng mga organizers na hindi siya pang long term. So I'll just leave it up there, no? And second, siguro just to insert Rancièrian in our discussion or in the context of your question, siguro papasok din dito yung well, evident dito yung concept ni Rancière ng la police or yung police. In a way na for Rancière, under the Rancièrian lens, we are being confined to our proper places, at least in today's pandemic situation. Such statements, no, claiming that the pandemic crisis is not to be treated as a political matter, already disables ordinary citizens to actively participate, and are only made to obey policies. So kita from there na on how these perceptions, if from the context na titingnan natin na communist pa or like may socialist leanings ng community pantries, nahihinder kaagad ang mga ordinary citizens to do their part. So actually ayun nga yung ayun din siguro yung point ko po sa first argument ko, is that some perceptions or perspectives of the phenomenon of the community pantries parang reinforce ideas that limit our very outlooks as political subjects. And of course, this has ontological and epistemological and ethical implications. Siguro in what sense, no? Pagdating doon, siguro ontological aspect, pagdating din sa perspective na communist, parang because we have that perception of what a communist is, we immediately cast doubt kasi we have perceptions about them na they want to destroy the government in the name of community so as to safeguard the state. So even there are IATF guidelines handed down to us, the fact na may perception na tayo na community pantries are connected to communism parang makes us suspicious, which hinders us from actively participating in the grander scheme of things. Siguro yun lang po for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Sir Kevin, and thank you, Sir MJ. I think there are still many comments and questions for Sir MJ, but unfortunately, we really do not have much time to accommodate all of the questions. I think it would be best if we can just directly forward it to our speaker for tonight, for our first speaker for tonight, Sir MJ. And that would be, I think, the questions of Dr. Reyes and some comments, additional comments and questions from Sir Jesse. So thank you so much. You can just directly send your questions or comments to Sir MJ. Congratulations, Sir MJ, sa iyong successful presentation. At this point, let us now listen to the second presenter for tonight. He is Beljun P. Enaya, presenting his paper entitled Philosophizing from the Farmer's View. Sir Beljun, you may take it.
Thank you. Good evening. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen now? Sir Eric?
Yes po.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And you can hear me clearly naman po?
Yes po.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so um, I entitled my paper, and of course, this is not complete, but at least there's already an initial draft of mine, which is 7 pages single space, and I don't know if it's good. So I titled my paper "Philosophizing from the Farmer's View." So the overview of my paper is the introduction, where I try to present the rationale, at least where I'm coming from, and then the next one is philosophy and the preposition, where I try to bridge the discussion, and my jumping board. Then the next is the municipality of San Francisco, the claim to be agriculture. This is the place, the context where I try to philosophize. And then next, the consciousness of the farmers, viewing the problem, the farmer's life. These are the themes. And then, of course, I try to synthesize it through condition, challenge, and continuity. And then the last one is the conclusion. Now, for the introduction, the philosophy of agriculture, or sometimes it's called agricultural philosophy, may not be so attractive, that is not very popular among contemporary philosophers in the Philippines or even globally. Well, it is true that there has been a lot of agricultural research, technological advancement to improve agricultural life. Some agricultural scientists are not familiar with the philosophy of agriculture. The trend to nowadays is very much focused on addressing the issues on productivity using agricultural technology. Perhaps in that scene, philosophy tends to become suppressed or apart from the awareness of the agricultural scientists. And in fact, when I talk to certain agricultural scientists here in our university, who can also compete globally in terms of agricultural scientific studies, he even said to me, he revealed to me that he could not find a publication on the philosophy of agriculture. However, when he read some books on philosophy, he discovered that philosophy books gave him an idea that there are philosophies that guide us in doing research in agricultural science. So he was not actually aware of the philosophies in what he was doing, and that was a very good and honest um, a confession from himself. I found a book entitled Agriculture and Philosophy, Agricultural Science and Philosophy by Lindsay Falvey, who is an Australian. He exposes and perhaps proves that there has been agricultural philosophy from historical view of philosophy and from different practices, including his own encounters. Um, his understanding of philosophy anchors in the pursuit of wisdom that spans the full breadth of useful knowledge, and that which enhances our well-being and ease of living within all other elements of nature. Because Falvey is basically an agricultural scientist, criticisms against his rare venture on philosophy are very possible. However, one point to learn from his book is that agricultural science impoverishes itself when it operates as technology separated from context. This message is certainly true in the context of our agricultural fields in the Philippines. Some government interventions that seek to help the local farmers are not based on research and context of the local farmers. Sometimes a government agency allocates aids to farmers because it is compelled to distribute the already procured supplies. Now, the issue at hand may not be about whether there is philosophy of the farmers or not. However, the concern is more on understanding the issues of the local farmers to see a deeper context in addressing the pressing problems they encounter. In this paper, I attempt to bring the views of the farmers to a philosophical discourse, and the aim is to clarify the views of the farmers by discussing different implications of their concerns and views. The views of the farmers are limited from their own experience and their locality in San Francisco, Southern Leyte, and the views are gathered from the face-to-face key informant interview. And from this data, I thematize my discussion that attempts to philosophize the views of the farmers. Now, okay. So, philosophy with a preposition. So, it is apparent that I am offering a kind of philosophy in this paper. However, as much as I want to contribute to philosophy, I am more concerned with philosophical processing that leads to a better and articulation of the position of the farmers of San Francisco. Hence, I discuss first the different approaches in viewing the philosophical discourses from the vantage point of preposition. The most common phrase is philosophy of, and this expression connotes a possession. In this case, philosophy is a possession of something or someone. For instance, the philosophy of Aristotle means that the idea is owned by him or attributed to him. The philosophy of indigenous people is another example that implies philosophy that belongs to a certain group of people. In this expression, one explores and discovers a philosophy that is attributed to a person or a community. Another one contribution of Geoffrey Okai in philosophy is his philosophy at the margins, which aims to understand the philosophy of work of the elderly people in many remote villages and indigenous communities in the Philippines. The use of the phrase philosophy at suggests that philosophy is at a particular location. In the case of Okai's article, philosophy is located at a marginal place. There is always a place for philosophy in each physical milieu. The presumption can be drawn that one can learn a certain philosophy from a particular place. The other one is, in another circumstance, philosophy for indicates that philosophy will be provided to a certain person or context. For instance, philosophy for children is geared towards educational development. Philosophy in this case is brought to children. Nevertheless, it must not be neglected that in the progress of philosophy for children, there is already a contention that there is also a philosophy of children. However, what is being emphasized in the phrase philosophy for is the purposive act of bringing philosophy to a certain place, community, or context. What is more fitting in this paper is philosophy from. The phrase suggests that philosophy comes from a certain source. Although it may indicate that the point of origin possesses the philosophy, it may also emphasize the clarity of the fact that a philosophy is learned or discovered. It may really sound the same with philosophy of and even philosophy at. However, the emphasis on from is specifically focused on the process. In this paper, I avoid using the noun form philosophy and use the progressive form philosophizing. Between the noun and the progressive verb, this paper takes advantage of the philosophizing from to indicate the process of learning from the data and forming philosophical ideas that are not definite in terms of locating and identifying the philosophy of farmers. There is an abstention of identifying the gathered data here as philosophy. There is even no intention of formulating a philosophical framework or philosophical view of the farmers. However, the farmer's view serves as the basis of philosophizing to draw a philosophical discourse that attempts to address the concerns of the farmers. Hence, philosophizing means clarifying the view, in this case, the farmers, and laying down the meaning and implications beyond their apparent views. So from that, we talk about now the context from where we want to philosophize. So the municipality of San Francisco, the claim to be agricultural. So the municipality of San Francisco was promulgated in 1951, and of course these are the legal these are just legal proof that it is a municipality indeed. And there also live an indigenous people who are migrant Mamanwa settlers in a Semikin-based community at Barangay Pinamudlan. So there's one barangay there. But most residents in San Francisco are migrants from Bohol. And then, as you can see in the official seal of the municipality, two major symbols can be identified, a boat and a carabao. These two symbols, which are located at the center of the seal, seems to signify the life of the municipality. The boat and the carabao provides a clue that the municipality is mainly an agricultural town. It is indeed true because the geographical location shows the proximity between the mountains and the sea. The major livelihood is actually fishing and farming. Furthermore, the religious aspect may also contribute to the understanding of the municipal life. The parish patron saint is Saint Isidore, who is known for being the patron of farmers. One may wonder why the name of municipality is San Francisco, but the patron saint is Saint Isidore. According to the traditional story, an image of San Francisco was ordered but did not arrive. Instead, an image of San Isidro or Saint Isidore was missent to the residents of San Francisco. Consequently, the parish or the municipality celebrates its fiesta on the feast day of Saint Isidore, and the parish celebrates its parish day on the feast day of Saint Francis Xavier. These two visualizations, as presented by the official seal and patron saint, may not sufficiently prove that the municipality is an agricultural land, but these symbols certainly reflect the life of the people as at least close to agricultural life. This premise incidentally justifies the location of this study to be appropriate, besides from the fact that I grew up from this town. This is my childhood town. Um, so next, actually, this is the view from the mountain. So as you can see, the island there is the Limasawa Island. So it just San Francisco is just across the Limasawa Island. And then here is for the view from the sea to the mountain. So that is San Francisco. So now, let me go to the themes if I still have time. The consciousness of the farmer. So in the interview, the farmers provide common expressions that show the conscious life experience of the immediate answers of the farmers. The following are the basic general questions like how are the farmers today? How do they understand agriculture, and what do they see in farming? Of course, this is not in English. This is in Bisaya, in our own dialect. The first farmer's response is either lisod or difficult, or sometimes they would say okera, which is fine. The second response revolves around the idea of planting, working, foundation of economy, and the third response mainly indicates farming as a source of food or living. So the view of the farmers about their status, which is described from fine to difficult, seems to be an inconsistent response in terms of condition of life. However, the real expression of okera or fine does not mean a life that is the same with privileged people. This response is qualified when the farmers express that okera refers to when sometimes a farmer can bring food to their table from the fruit of their labor. In other words, a farmer is still trying to feel satisfied because he or she can savor the harvest, uh, even if it's not every day. Nevertheless, the actual meaning of the response manifests a struggle in life to sustain their source of living. Hence, for the farmers, life is a struggle. The farmers believe that agriculture is a contact with nature that supports other life sustenance. Tilling the land is a form of work, and this work is a value for the farmers. Moreover, the emphasis on being the backbone of economy expresses the fact that farmers believe that their work with the land is very relevant for human life and society. In this regard, we asked the question also that how much is really being valued in farming? How do the farmers actually value the importance of their contribution, and how much the society concretely appreciate the value of the farmers? These questions may be addressed in the later discussion. In connection to the first and second response, the farmers see their work in the farm as a source of their living. The basic beneficiary of farming is the family of the farmers because they work mainly to provide for the family, and they value the fact that through farming or working the farm, they have something to hold on to for the daily life. There is a kind of assurance for daily consumption, but this assurance remains in question at some point. What we can learn from the farmers' consciousness is that their life remains difficult even if they believe that they could always get something from farming, and even if their work is important. Thus, we also need to see what and how they see their problems as farmers. Now, the next is the viewing the problem. So I find the problems of the farmers as the most important part in this philosophizing. The farmer's listing of problems allows us to see what we need to address. However, beyond the problems perceived by the farmers, there might also some problems perhaps cannot be neglected due to its being viral in the authored problems. In this regard, I ask simple questions such as unsa may mga problema sa pag-uma, or what are the problems in farming, and then giunsa man pagtubag sa mga problema sa pag-uma, or how are these problems being addressed. The first and most persisting problem that challenges the farmers is in terms of financial capacity. Farming entails capital, not just human capital, but basically monetary capital to maintain the farm. For example, fertilizers. Aside from this, farmers clamor for low gain from their labor, and consequently, they will again be needing more financial assistance. The other major concern of the farmers is the land. Many of these farmers are not landowners. They only rent the land, or they work as farmers because of compensation. What's worse is that when there is possible agricultural land, the owner does not want it to be cultivated. Um, Also, there are lands like forest area that are already restricted by the DNR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources. For some farmers, the upland area, they can also benefit the forest even just for a small portion of it. But because of new policies, they have difficulty to cultivate and benefit the land. Lastly, seasonal calamity or seasonal factor in farming pushes the farmers to look for alternative source of income. This means that they cannot rely on the harvest because work in the farm or harvest from the farm is not daily. In the usual practice of the farmers, the answer to the financial challenge is through loan, such as borrowing money or items in exchange of a certain amount of their harvest. However, government through the Department of Agriculture provides different form of assistance to the farmers association. It must be noted that there are at least 9 farmers associations and most of them are accredited association. Each barangay also has women's associations which sometimes benefit from agricultural programs. The association helps the farmers to alleviate their problems. A few associations utilize the idea of cooperative work. For instance, the association works on a certain project or land, and the members help each other to maintain the project or land. However, this cooperative work is different from the old version of cooperation, which is called hungos. Hungos is actually practiced by the farmers before in San Francisco, and it refers to a voluntary cooperation. Farmers who are neighbors in terms of their farmed land take turn to help each other as neighbors. For instance, during planting and harvest season, when one farmer schedules for planting or harvesting, the neighboring farmers will help in planting or harvesting. In this case, there is no monetary compensation. What each farmer gets is the reciprocal help from his or her neighboring farmers. Now, through the association, farmers can lobby their concerns to any concerned authority. However, the efficiency of the association is a step to address some individual problems of the farmers, and as a group remains to be as a group, the association needs to be assessed. From the problems to the existing solutions perceived by the farmers, the views of the farmers seem to value productivity that leads to greater income. The financial challenge and the little aid from the government may only be a vicious circle without addressing the gap. The farmers believe that at some point, farming itself assists their immediate need, but the real challenge is the sustainability of farming in terms of livelihood that really depends on farming. Among the 3 major problems, which are financial, land, and seasonal challenges, the concern for finances depicts a serious issue among farmers. Although holistic approach is acknowledged, there might still something else that needs to be identified. Now, um, on the farmer's life, from the condition to the problems, from the condition to the problems of the farmer's view on their own life need to be recognized to understand completely the concerns from their experiences. So for this section, I tried again. I have different questions here, like what is your understanding of a farmer who progresses, and then what is the principle, what is their principle, and then they are going to describe also what they learn from the farmer's life, and how did the farmer overcome the challenges of their challenges. The farmers believe that progress can be seen when a farmer is happy, still farming, able to let the children finish their educational program, gains from his own labor, and grows in all aspects of life. It can be observed that progress includes both material and immaterial aspects of life. It seems that there is no separation between materiality and immateriality of progress. Happiness in farming can be manifested in the continuity of working as a farmer. Profit and children's educational achievement are results of the labor. The primary principle of a farmer is to work. Working is not mere working, which is doing what is being told or doing something irregularly. For the farmers, work requires hard work, or that's pagpugi, or consistency. However, working also needs planning and managing. A farmer cannot sustain his life as a farmer without making his work as his passion. The most valuable lesson from the farmers is that taking care of the farm needs to be constant, a daily routine. One farmer beautifully expressed the daily care as di mapa ang tunog, or footprints never fade. Taking care is like taking care of a child, and that implies focus and alertness. This care also requires a sacrifice and cooperation. This could also mean that farming is not only for the farmer himself or herself, but also for other people around him. Overcoming the challenges is not an easy task. Living as a farmer entails praying to God for good health, which keeps a farmer in continuing to work. Continuity is really a factor in facing the problems. This continuity perhaps means to keep going by carrying the farm. Why atrasay or no giving up allows the farmer to succeed in his goals. Overcoming can only be realized by the farmers through desire. Contra gusto or unwillingness will certainly hinder the farmer to achieve his goal. I think I don't have much time anymore, but I'd like to go now to the synthesis, which is from the thematic discussion. I find at least three things here: condition, challenge, and continuity. From the consciousness of the farmers, I see that the condition of the farmers is that life is difficult, and the challenge, which is also manifested by the problems. I see this challenge as um, uh, actually the different life forms or objects that enable the condition to either become worse or better. And it may not be something wrong per se, but it is part of the process of moving forward. And then the third one is continuity, which can be understood in at least two ways. So first, continuity of the cycle of the condition and problems, and second is a continuity of life as a farmer who learns to move forward from the condition. And the second understanding of continuity is what the farmers is practicing. So from those discussions, just to wrap up, here my paper is actually attempting to provide an avenue for a more philosophical discourses from the vantage point of farmers in the municipality of San Francisco. With that, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sir Beljun. Before we proceed to the questions and comments, first let's read the comment by Dr. Elicor. He said here that there's also philosophy with children, which entails collaboration, dialogical inquiry, grassroots philosophizing. And Sir Kevin is also chipping in that baka useful for MJ i-check kung ang idea ng community pantry ay embedded at hindi novel sa perspective ng agricultural community. Maganda yung tahi ng dalawang topics. So thank you for those comments. At this point, let us now listen to Dr. Paolo Bolaños.
Maraming salamat again, Eric, and good evening, Beljun.
Good evening, Doc.
Okay, just so the discussion will begin. I wrote down three things here, three concerns. The first is as I'm trying to as I was listening to you, I was trying to grapple with the idea of the idea of philosophy. What is the question? What is philosophy? And I'm trying to make sense of whether a particular study is philosophical or not. But I do appreciate the part where you distinguished yung different ways of using prepositions to qualify a philosophy for, philosophy at, and so on. However, while I appreciate that, I'm still it's not yet clear to me how it ties in your study. First I'd like to say that the study is quite it is interesting, and I think it's very important. It is novel also, but I think we might want to parang there it still warrants some qualifications, some clarifications. So anyway, the first thing that I wrote here, I'd like to ask, kasi the use of the word philosophy of, and then at the beginning you said that what you're presenting is a kind of philosophy of agriculture. No, or if not, at least you mentioned, that phrase, philosophy of agriculture. And I'm trying to ask myself, what is a philosophy of agriculture? And whether that the word philosophy there is used in parang in a sense na hindi, not in the academic sense, no, but yung parang philosophy as a way of, life, philosophy as ito ang aking, for example, when ito ang filosofiya ko sa buhay, ito yung paniniwala ko, this is what I believe in, so this is my philosophy of life. I wonder if so in other words, for lack of a better term, we can refer to that use of the word philosophy as a kind of colloquial use. I'm wondering if you're using it in that way when you say philosophy of agriculture, or when we say philosophy of agriculture, whether indeed there is a body of literature that a body of literature that speaks of philosophy of agriculture, the way, let's say, philosophy of technology has its own body of literature. So whenever people talk about philosophy of technology, we already right away understand what they're referring to. Pero hindi pa clear sa akin if philosophy of agriculture is whether there is a body of literature on philosophy of agriculture. So that's my first concern. And then, sige, para maybe you could respond to that before I ask the other two.
Okay. Thank you for that, Doc. Actually, you are right that you are correct in your feeling that you are grappling concerning the meaning of philosophy of agriculture, because even the agricultural scientists or some other philosophers cannot even identify. There's still a struggle in that identification of what philosophy of agriculture really is, something like that. But the premise that I'm using actually is coming from the way Dr. Lindsay Falvey uses philosophy in his book, which is non-academic actually. I wrote the meaning here in my introduction that his philosophy for him is actually the pursuit of wisdom that spans the full breadth of useful knowledge, and that which enhances our well-being and ease of living within all other elements of nature. So that's very generic actually in that sense, but actually for the vantage point of him being agriculture scientist, he's trying to see the gap, or what lacks in his uh, profession as a agriculture scientist, is that the philosophy that needs to you know mm, to seek clear understanding what they are doing in the first place. So parang yun yung hugot niya. So again, you're correct, Doc, that it's not a non-academic approach. I mean, in a sense that when I try to use the word philosophy there.
Corollary to that, then, are you developing in your study a philosophy of agriculture?
That is an attempt still, Doc, because this can be my jumping board towards that. This is because I'm thinking of this is a prelude to my proposal. So actually, I have that kind of direction to contribute to the to the understanding of what philosophy of agriculture is? What could it be?
Okay, so kasi it has to be contextualized that way. Otherwise, if what you're doing is simply identifying, for example, a municipality and not that there's nothing important. As a matter of fact, like I said earlier, it's that kind of research is important, but how is it different from uh, what they're already doing in other disciplines, right? Like anthropology or um, other or in sociology, perhaps. Um, and it's important that uh, we understand exactly why a certain study is philosophical. So you're contextualizing it in that way will help us understand that there is something philosophical there to pursue. So that's why I asked, what is philosophy of agriculture? Are we just using the term philosophy in a loose sense, or pero it looks like you're able to contextualize it properly, and therefore it's not used in a loose sense. Kasi you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we do use the term philosophy in a very loose sense na lahat na lang ng pwede nating pag-usapan ay philosophy. Hindi naman pwedeng ganun lagi. Kaya dapat we have to be able to contextualize why we are using the term philosophy. And yes, indeed, when we say philosophy of agriculture, as a matter of fact, it's probably the first time that I hear it. But does it exist? And how do we do philosophy of agriculture? How is it different from philosophy, let's say environmental philosophy or environmental ethics, and so on? And for example, is there a difference between philosophy of agriculture and agricultural ethics? Yung mga ganun, you have to be able to contextualize your study that way. So that the discourse, kasi ganun naman you are arguing that there is philosophy there, but it's important that you're able to justify what you mean by philosophy. So that's the first concern. And anyway, you're still in the process of developing your study. So you might want to look into that. The second concern that I have about the method, narinig ko lang kanina, marami kang pinanggit, pero ang narinig ko that stood out was you're going to conduct interviews, right? I'm just wondering, can you just read that part where you the part where you talked about the method that you're going to use? Kasi I'm also concerned about that. It's related to the first question that I asked. The part you have there a research design, right, or a methodological framework. Can you just read it quickly para lang ma-refresh ko yung
Okay. Okay. In this paper, I attempt to bring the views of the farmers to a philosophical discourse. The aim is to clarify the views of the farmers by discussing different implications of their concerns and views. The views of the farmers are limited from their own experience and their locality in San Francisco Southern Leyte. The views are gathered from the face-to-face key informant interview, and from these data, I thematize my discussion that attempts to philosophize the views of the farmers.
Okay, so yeah, so I don't hindi naman problematic masyado. Hindi naman problematic. It's just that I wanted to ask you whether that's the only thing that you're doing in your proposed dissertation, no? Kung hindi naman, then I think you, in the course of developing your study, your proposal, you will have to also develop your research design. Kasi yung interview, isa lang yan doon sa mga gagawin mo. Yun yung nasa isip ko eh. Hindi naman puro interview lang yung gagawin niya. Kasi there's a contextualization. For example, you will have to discuss, I think a chapter or a big chunk of your study will be devoted to qualifying what you mean by philosophy of agriculture. Is yung pa lang ibang method na yon, hindi yon interview, no, it's more of basically reconstructing in developing an idea of a new type of philosophy. Okay. It's not that in other words, I am actually looking forward to the day when you're already developed that idea of philosophy of agriculture. Kasi it's something that hindi pa clear sa ngayon, hindi pa clear sa presentation mo. So that's probably what you are going to one of the things that you're going to work on, no? Convince your readers that there is an area perhaps as an underdeveloped and it is related to agriculture. All right, so and then yung sa research design, the research design later on will be the development or the presentation of the flow of your discussion in your dissertation. And interview is just going to be one of those things that you're going to do. No, definitely there will be contextualization and other types of discussions. It's not yet clear. Even you mentioned nga yung I forgot the name of the author, pero hindi pa clear, hindi ka pa nagpresent ng parang literature review. There is a body of for example, body of work on philosophy of agriculture, albeit not well developed yet. Pero maybe you can already demonstrate to us, no, through your literature review that there are people who are actually working on this. You can say that sinabi mo nga, it's not yet clear, it's not well developed, but that's precisely why you need to write a literature review to demonstrate that gap. And then once you've demonstrated that gap, then you can already argue that here I am. This is how I'm going to contribute to the debate or contribute to the discussion. Kasi in presenting your literature review, you're able to identify the deficiencies of the material or the literature that have been published so far. So yeah, so yun yung sa tingin ko kailangan mong i-develop. I'm not really I mean I'm concerned about how I'm concerned about the presentation, no, later on of your dissertation. I'm not really concerned whether you will have enough material material that will help you basically material or insights that will come from the community. Yung sa tingin ko ang marami. Okay? But contextualizing it and presenting it as a dissertation in philosophy, that would be the challenge. That would be the challenge. Now, the third question that I have, or third issue, you mentioned that you are borrowing the idea of the idea of Jeffrey Okai, specifically his idea of philosophy at the margins. No, Jeff and I are actually working on that very theme. No, I find. And actually the paper that I'm working on at the moment is precisely on that idea, no, philosophizing or philosophizing at the margins, or more specifically critical theory at the margins. And of course my inspiration also comes from Dr. Okai, but and I'm in constant communication with him regarding, you know, the research. But I think we need to qualify and what it means. Philosophy at the margins. Uh, when you say philosophy at the margins, I think there's a play of words. And I've had long conversations with Jeff about this. I think he is actually playing with words, and he agreed with me when I asked him. When you say philosophy at the margins, my understanding, I told him, is that it doesn't mean that that, for example, when you say margins, you're talking about a certain, let's say, minority group. No? Uh, eh, my understanding of philosophy at the margins or critical theory at the margins is that it's not because this group of people are doing philosophy. It's not that they are doing critical theory. I think what it means when you say philosophy at the margins is so there are two things, right? It's not because they are doing philosophy or doing critical theory, no. It's also not because you want to bring philosophy to them. It's not because you, for example, you climb down from your ivory tower and then go to the margins and teach them philosophy, or tell them, okay, you have to learn how to do critical theory because this is the only way you can emancipate yourself or yourselves. So so critical theory at the margins doesn't mean first that minority group is doing philosophy, specifically academic philosophy. Okay. Second, it also doesn't mean that as a philosopher, then my role is to go there to teach them philosophy. I think what it means, critical theory at the margins, is that it's kind of immersive philosophy. No? It's kind of immersive praxis. No, that when we go to a minority group, if an academic, to be more specific, as an academic, or if an academic visits a minority group, he doesn't go there to teach them anything, but to go, he goes there so that he could learn from the life world of that group. So, in other words, the play of words, that Dr. Okay uses in his articles is that he argues in different. I mean, the latest one is in Critique, but he also has previous articles on the same subject. But his argument, as I follow it, he is saying that, and this is why I am developing the idea of epistemic positionality, no? Yung reversal of epistemic positionality. Meaning, as an academic, I go there not because I have philosophy with me and then I go there to teach them philosophy. The epistemic positionality is reversed because I go there because I want to learn from the life world of this minority group so that my philosophy is enriched. So the pedagogical positionality is reversed. Okay. Kasi kadalasan ang tingin nga natin academics tayo, pupunta tayo sa mga lugar na yan para maturuan sila kung paano mag-isip, paano magmilosopiya, paano mamuhay. Pero the argument of Okay is different. On the contrary, we go there because we want to learn from them. So critical theory, then he's not saying that there is philosophy there. What he's saying is our philosophy can actually become, when we open up, our philosophy to them, our philosophy becomes more inclusive. It becomes it is enriched by the experience of no of being of immersing ourselves in their community. So in other words, in relation to your study, then whether you are looking for, kaya nga yung ang concern ko are you looking for when you immerse yourself in that community, in a farming community, are you looking for a philosophy, or are you developing a philosophy of agriculture grounded in the life world of that community? Because those two are two different things. If ako ang nagbabasa, I would be more convinced if what you're doing is the latter, because you are not presupposing that they have a systematic philosophy. What you're actually saying is that I am, as a researcher, developing my own philosophy, but I will go there so that I will have, the normative, I can learn from their normative practices. Not that they are offering a philosophy or a systematic philosophy. It's the other way around. They don't have that. What you're doing is you're trying to systematize their ideas. Trying to develop a language of philosophy, a philosophical language grounded in their normative communal practices or community practices. So that's different, and that to me is a convincing project, no? As opposed to ang project ay pupunta ako diyan para ma-document ko kung ano yung filosofiya nila. If that is what you're going to do, parang you are already presupposing that they are doing systematic or academic philosophy. So there is promise in what you're doing, Beljun. It's just a matter of presenting it in such a way that you don't run into yung complications of making, let's say, your method too complicated or unnecessarily convoluted, and at the same time yung project mo, what is it exactly that you are doing? Kasi nung nakikinig ako sa'yo, yeah, you want to develop a philosophy of agriculture, but then yung sa madang gitna, or at this the second section of your presentation, you are trying to parang justify or parang argue or your apology, parang naging apologetic kasi ito philosophy rin to, parang gano'n. Philosophy at, philosophy for, philosophy in, with, ganyan. I don't know if hopefully my recommendations are clear. There's promise in what you're doing. Kaya lang kailangan yeah, as a last note, yung philosophy at the margins is a very powerful image of thought, no? But we have to understand the nuances and the yung kasi definitely Jeffrey is playing with words, no? He's saying kasi to put it in simple terms, ang sinasabi niya, maybe mainstream critical theory, no, can actually improve and make the language of critical theory more inclusive and richer when it recognizes the practices or the life worlds of peasant movements, no? In one of the articles, he says he's arguing that. So in other words, parang it's just like doing doing Filipino philosophy na parang ang presupposition ng ibang philosophers kasi there is Filipino philosophy. Yes, there is a Filipino life world. There are ways of doing things, belief systems that are specifically Filipino. But intellectualizing them and using them as grounds to develop a theory, that's different. Because there's no theory, there's no theory in the margins. But the margins can be resources for the development of a theory. Hopefully that's clear. But you may respond, Beljun, so
Yeah.
that kung may we need to clarify, then we can do so.
Okay, Doc. Thank you, Doc. On the second concern po, actually my paper is not about my project in terms of my dissertation project. This is actually just a very small study, and this is just an attempt to test on how will I go if I'm going to pursue a bigger project from this point. So this paper is actually how shall I call it? Just a tip and a kind of practice for myself also in doing this before I go to a bigger project. And the scope here is actually more on the processing, more just like what I've said, it's more philosophizing. So I maybe I have the mistake there in trying to start with philosophy of agriculture, but and then I agree with you that we need to clarify that if there is something like that and some philosophy of agriculture, and that needs another paper for that matter, and which if I'm going to pursue a dissertation in relation to that, then that would be one chapter in my dissertation or part of the adjunction, something like that. But I also tried, I also qualified in the portion of my papers to that I'm not making a philosophy here in a sense that there is I'm presuming that there's philosophy from the farmers, and actually I think you have acknowledged that one already. And so I'm more concerned on the process on how I actually articulate the data and try to uh, trying to be confident that I'm doing philosophy in this
Just
sense.
to
Yeah.
baka makalimutan ko, Beljun, it's good that you mentioned the word articulate, how you are concerned about how you are going to articulate. I think that's when that's siguro the stage where or the level where the philosophizing happens, no? You are articulating not necessarily a systematic philosophy. You are articulating a life world, no? And you actually, what you have to also talk about why is it important to articulate the life world of a farming community? Can we learn anything from them? And is it only about farming, or is the farming, are there farming practices, can, can, can they also contribute to an alternative theory of kasi ganun kay Jeff Okay eh. He's not arguing that we become the peasants. Ang sinasabi niya, the peasants could show us an alternative to the modern way of life. So maybe something of that sort, if you are inspired by philosophy at the margins, something of that sort perhaps should be developed in your study. So yeah, it's a good thing that you mentioned nga, that you are grappling with how you are going to articulate. No, that's a good thing. No, because that then it means that you are really seriously thinking about philosophy, the way you can philosophically express yung ano mo, yung let's say data, for lack of a better term, no? Okay, go ahead.
On your third, thank you for that, Doc. On the third concern, about the philosophy at the margin. Actually, before I presented this one, I actually gave a, my I consulted Dr. Okay on the portion where I discussed philosophy at, because I tried to consult if my interpretation of his article, one article, is correct, and he actually confirmed that my interpretation, which is trying to, philosophy at, which means trying to locate, I mean, there is philosophy at a certain place, something like that. So he actually agreed to me. That's why I was also kind of confident. And although I understand that you have some disagreement when it comes to this kind of idea, but at least from the point of view of Dr. Okay, it was confirmed that my interpretation to the phrase, only the phrase, it's not the whole project, but at least on the level of preposition, he affirmed that the one paragraph there of my interpretation is actually correct. And yeah, that's just a response to the concern, Doc.
Yes, I think it depends, I suppose, on the way we use the term philosophy, no? But sa tingin ko kasi merong mas malalim na sinasabi si Jeff doon sa philosophy at the margins, no? Ang parang sa akin kasi mas malalim at mas philosophically powerful, no? Pagka sinabing there is you can be inspired by that life world, no? Parang gano'n. Okay, go. Sige, thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doc Pao and Sir Beljun. Unfortunately, we are pressed on time. And if there are more questions, no, for Sir Beljun, or comments about his work, you can just probably send him a direct message. Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Sir Beljun. And now for our third presenter, it is now time for us to listen to Dr. Franz Giuseppe F. Cortez and his paper, Arithmomaniac Education in the Metric Society, the role of the school in the quantification cult. Okay, let's listen to Dr. Franz.
Thank you, Prince. How many minutes do I have for this, Eric?
Doc, for the presentation, probably 15 minutes at most, so that we can still have time for the question and answer. Thank you, Doc.
I don't know if I can present this in 15 minutes. I'll start at once. That's a title, and the first presentation I did is for PANEL, Philosophical Association of Northern Luzon, last October. So I still want, I know that this is a very rough draft of a paper that I am writing, and I honestly and sincerely ask for your valuable insights, comments, and questions so that I can firm up my arguments. So you can see there, number is the within of all things. That's from Pythagoras. On this paper, I will discuss the critical role of the school in the emergence of a metric society. What is that metric society? A society that is seduced by numbers and obsessed with quantifying all facets of the social sphere. Nahumaling o pagkahumaling sa numero, sabi ni Trillanes. Specifically, I will argue that one of the main drivers of this quantification cult is the authoritarian banking education that essentially manufactures arithmomaniac minds. Thus, the school is not just a passive victim, but an active perpetrator of numerocracy. Education is not just complicit, but also contributory to the rise of a metric society. So that's, in a nutshell, is my argument, my paper. So what is that metric society? I'm getting from this famous book of Stephen Mao, originally written in German, published in 2016, I think, or 2015, but written into English in 2017. The Metric Society on the Quantification of the Social, where he said a trend, that's what is that metric society? A trend whereby social phenomena are increasingly measured, described, and influenced by numbers. So basically, it's a society fixated and obsessed with charts and graphs, stars and scores, rankings and ratings, likes and leverages. And I put there some concrete examples that are also mentioned in the book of Stephen Mao, hysterical ratings and hyper-rankings of everything from universities to medical diagnostics, from countries' credit worthiness to customer satisfaction, and from social media reputations to self-tracking of one's health, moods, habits, sexual activities, and lifestyles. So basically, we are living in a metric society. What are the drivers according to Stephen Mao? So number one is the state. For political governance, numbers are necessary to deploy authority and to rationalize governmental functions. Number two, market forces. The economy. The essence of capitalist markets derives, according to Stephen Mao, I quote, derives from the use of numerical data, calculation, and its standardization. And then third, digitalization. The digitalization of everything brought about by technological advancements makes it easier to collect, analyze, and store large amounts of data, even from the most private spheres, including homes, habits, hobbies, and heart rates. And economization. The economization of everything brought about by neoliberal ideologies and policies demands outputs based on measurable goals and performance indicators, KPIs, relegating non-economic values in the name of profitability. So these are the four main drivers that are mentioned by Stephen Mao. So dito ako nag-isip ng konti na sabi ko, parang may kulang. That's why I came up with probably the school is not just complicit but also a culprit in the metric society. So yun ang aking intervention dito. Kaya nga sabi ko, you can help me firm up my argument. So here, very glaring na wala dito yung education is not mentioned as one of the drivers of the quantification cult. I'm also reading, I've read the book by Jerry Muller, the title is Tyranny of Metrics, and hindi ko na na-mention dito, pero I'm still looking for the role of the school, pero hindi rin masyadong na-mention. Parang sa history, may sinabi siya, but not so glaring. So that's why I want to talk about the role of the school. No? So I'm using the term arithmomania. This is an abnormal compulsion to count objects or actions and make mathematical calculations, according to Merriam-Webster. And it's a psychological condition that commonly manifests in people with obsessive compulsive disorder and OCD. OCD. So basically, obsession, abnormal compulsion, obsession and compulsion to count objects. It was described by Sigmund Freud, by William James, and by Pierre Janet. So these are some of the progenitors of psychotherapy. Of course, we know Sigmund Freud as the father of psychotherapy. And then I also try to locate the use of arithmomania in education literature. So if it's used, of course, mainly in psychology, I tried to search if they are also using it, scholars are also using it in other fields. And I found out in economics, it's being used, hindi ko na lang isinama dito, but I have a slide about how it's being used in economics in the 1960s and 70s. And then I mentioned here some, Robert Jackalone, Henricus Stam, and then in 2019 to 2020, I was presenting paper. The title is, that's about Sci-Hub, and I'm mentioning the term arithmomania also. And then I found out that there is a webinar presentation sponsored by Elsevier. It was also mentioned by the presenters. And then our very own Dr. Rochi Machenzo is also using the term intellectual arithmomania. So I'm just giving credit to these people. Okay, so following my discussion of the metric society, the mentioned scholars understand the academic version of arithmomania as an offshoot of the quantification of the social world. Education is just one among the many victims of the number rush. I will not disagree with this insight. However, ito yung aking argument nga. I will further argue that arithmomania has already been in the educational space even before the rise of the metric society. Arithmomania is a necessary outgrowth of a banking education described many years ago by Paulo Freire. And it is the arithmomaniac personality produced by the school that is one of the main drivers of the metric society or the quantification code. So how does that happen? So ito na yung aking kumbaga personal na reflection. Kumbaga walang masyadong mga citation dito. I just sat down and tried to reflect how did it happen. But of course, informed by the philosophy of Paulo Freire. So I start by saying this. Every normal child who for the first time walks into the premises of the school is a free and spontaneous human being. They anticipate new experiences and adventures. They are enthusiastic to meet people. They want to talk, to shout, to dance, to laugh, to run, to play. They are full of curiosities and wonder. They are armed with questions and are excited about diverse answers. No normal child thinks first about an impending competition for ranking with their seatmates. They do not anticipate honors, nor compete for the stars, nor dream of high grades. Learning and not numbering is the fundamental impulse of a child. But the normal child enters a traditional classroom, which, according to Freire, is operating on banking pedagogy. So this pedagogy is comparable to a banking transaction because the teacher deposits lifeless knowledge to a supposed empty and passive mind of the educatee and withdraws this deposited knowledge via assessments called examinations from a robotized mind that has become analogous to an automated teller machine. In this setup, knowledge is unquestioned and school-based without any relation to the educatee's concrete life experiences. Learning is impermanent and memory-based. So that's very impermanent. Like after the exam, many students already forgot what happened. So rather than a space for freedom and a practice for democracy, traditional education becomes a place for domestication and a rehearsal for authoritarianism. Initially, so this is what I was thinking, siguro parang phenomenological din siguro itong nangyayari, So I was thinking, initially the normal child is culture shock in this traditional classroom, which is antithetical to their fundamental curiosity, spontaneity, and playfulness. Yung para bang pumasok ka sa classroom, 5-year-old child, yun na nga you are very, you're curious, you're spontaneous, playful, free, and then you will be culture shocked because the traditional classroom is antithetical to it. Expectation does not coincide with reality. So they have this expectation, reality of the classroom is different. Narration clashes with their fundamental inquisitiveness. She thought that she can question, but she is taught to just answer questions. She thought that she can run and play, but she is taught to just sit and stay. She thought that she can speak out her mind, but she is taught to parrot her teacher's mind. Initially as well, the normal child will react with annoyance and resistance. They are not used to being regulated or managed. Resistance and not renunciation is the fundamental impulse of a bored mind. So boring para do sa mga bata, di nagre-resist sila. Kasi they are not used to being regulated because, in most homes, kids are allowed to play. and they are not controlled basically by their parents. So it is at this initial moment of annoyance and resistance when the teacher deploys her authority in the name of classroom management. Kasama pa yan sa board exam ng mga teacher, yung classroom management. Educators must be quiet, focused on the lessons, obedient with the commands, slow to speak, committed to listen, prepared to answer questions, oblivious to question answers. A culture of silence is nurtured. A culture of voice is negated. Obviously, in this situation, both the educator and the educatee confuse authority with authoritarianism. Banking education gives rise to the authoritarian educator. Or more accurately, authoritarianism goes hand in hand with banking education. The authoritarian banking educator implements one of the most potent apparatuses of classroom management and control, the grade. The grade is not just a passive number, nor a mere abstraction, nor an innocent indicator. It is because grading is an act of interpretation, and the grade is a fragment of a person expressed in numerical form. That is why a grade can shape identity, and an educatee may find their identity in their grade. It may even carve destiny or may lead to some fatalities. So, di ba may mga nagpapakamatay dahil sa grade? Inasmuch as grades bring joys and triumphs, it may also mean trouble and tribulations. Grading creates and accentuates the educatee's position in classroom hierarchy. The educator is at the top and the educatees are at the bottom. When this is shaken deliberately or accidentally, the educatee is constantly reminded on who the final grade giver is. Furthermore, educatees themselves are segmentized and categorized based on grades achieved. Valedictorian, salutatorian, best in math, best in science, row 4, row 1, section 2, section 21. Who does not want to be on the upper chamber? Who does not fear to be consigned near the garbage bin? High grade becomes an obsession, low grade becomes a phobia. Phobia is just another side of mania. One avoids the object of fear, while paradoxically attends to it. The other is fixated with the object of desire. It is not by accident that Freud analyzed obsessions side by side with phobias. Whether it is phobic or manic, the compulsion is to count the graded achievements and to compute the achieved grades. So if the school is an ideological state apparatus in the reckoning of the French neo-Marxist Louis Althusser, we can describe further the school grade as both a repressive and an ideological school apparatus. Be an obedient copycat of the teacher and you will get a high grade. Be an obstinate rebel of the system and you will get a low or failing grade. In the minds of young educators, the grade has become the ultimate carrot and stick. Just like the dogs, rats, and pigeons in the classical and operant conditioning of Ivan Pavlov and B.F. Skinner, young minds actively respond to rewards and punishments. And so, the grade urges obedience, silences the noisy, and domesticates the wild. The authoritarian banking educator is respected out of fear, recognized out of trepidation, and obeyed out of anxiety. The educator realizes that life in the school revolves around the grade. If the sun is the center of the solar system, the grade is the heart of the school system. Educators always need to count and be accountable for their grade. Kasama ba yan sa exam? Graded ba yan? Bakit yan lang ang grade ko? Bakit mas mataas si Pepe? Bakit ganun lang ang grade ni Pilar? Nambabagsak ba si Sir Digong? Mataas ba ang mag-grade si Madam Lenny? High marks boost self-esteem an assurance of advantage in the struggle for classroom recognition and beyond. Conversely, low or failing grades leave marks beyond classroom walls and into the distant future. I'm thinking here of those who are getting low grades in their academic life, but eventually they become successful. But still, when they go back to their reunion, they still feel somewhat, anxious because they were those who are not performing well in the school. These are yung sinasabi ko na it leaves, failing grades leave marks beyond classroom walls and into the distant future. So either the fear of underperforming or the grandeur of excelling consumes the consciousness of the educated. Everybody looks up to the sacred number. Everything must be accomplished for the grade. Everything that is accomplished must be graded. And so, an arithmomaniac personality is fundamentally born and formed in the school, specifically in a traditional authoritarian banking educational space. The arithmomaniac mind is now fully rehearsed or trained to participate in the metric society. And it becomes a vicious cycle. So, final remarks. Let us make it clear. We don't commit numbers to the fire. The world stops to function effectively without measurement. Quantification is valuable and necessary. To use the language of the critical theorists, it has emancipatory potential. Furthermore, assessment of the knowledge and learning gained by educators is not only important, but also fair and just. What we complain about is when an authoritarian banking educator deploys the grade as the ultimate carota et baculus, when the classroom becomes a space for competition at the expense of cooperative living, when young minds are rehearsed for hierarchy and order at the expense of heterogeneity and disruption. We complain about a banking pedagogy and its inherent accessory, the authoritarian educator. For the obsession with quantification is also driven and intensified by oppressive and domesticating classrooms, creating spectators who are mystified by numbers and unable to read the interests, values, and normativities inherent in them. I think that's the last. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much for that very riveting presentation, Dr. Franz Cortez. Now we are opening the table for your questions and comments pertaining to the work of Dr. Franz. Doc, just to start off our discussion regarding your presentation, do you consider on including in your research some of the researches or works, particularly in the field of education? Because once we try to take a look at it, no, they are actually focused on improving the teaching methods. Not just that, no. But the thing is, I agree with you in your presentation that it is somewhat very positivist in nature, considering that they are actually focusing on the outcome or on the outputs. Yeah, my question would be that, no, are you willing to probably do a meta-analysis of the researches that are being made, particularly in the field of education? Are you planning to include that in the paper?
I haven't thought about it, Eric, but I'm taking note of it. Meta-analysis of, how do you call that? Meta-analysis of education?
Of papers or researches made specifically in the field of education po.
Researches in the field of education.
Opo, kasi parang I think that was the...
Can you cite example of this? Like topics like what?
For example, Doc, on evaluation of the curriculum, that is something that is very widely discussed, particularly in educational administration. And then another thing would be measurement methods of measurement I think that that falls under statistics and education and other probably correlated studies. So yeah, I was just well, giving a probably a comment now. Probably if you want to go into that.
Thank you for that, Eric. I'll consider that, but I haven't thought about it. So thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you so much, Doc Franz. Now let's listen to Dr. Paulo Bolaños.
Salamat, Eric. Pasensya na at nagtaas ulit ako ng kamay. Salamat, Franz, sa iyong presentation. No? I appreciate it. And of course, I agree, no, with your argument. It reminds me of what the late Brother Romy Abulad told us, no, before. I think it was in undergrad or the graduate school na rin, the graduate school na yata. When one of our classmates asked about grades, no, yung whether the recitation is graded, ganyan. Because Brother Romy was fond of yung exchange in the classroom, and then he responded by saying, it's unfortunate that we still have to grade you. So that reminded your presentation reminded me of what he said. It's unfortunate that as academics we are forced to grade our students. Now, the other thing that I want to say, you mentioned that the school is the sinabi mo yung the school is an ideological apparatus. No? I'm wondering whether, besides the school or even before the school, whether the home or the family is actually the first ideological apparatus. No, it's an institution of or the ideological institution, no? The family, no? Or the home. Doon nag-uumpisa. At I think in the department, even in our messenger chat, we had that exchange regarding the role of parenting, the role of the family in the development of critical thinking, and so on. So my take is, the school, I think I agree with you that the school is an ideological apparatus. No, the university is an ideological apparatus, but I think the home or the family plays a very crucial, even more important role in the development of how young people think, more so than the university or more so than the school. I think it happens in the family. Doon nag-uumpisa lahat. No? So sabi ko nga doon sa messenger natin, we breed ex-apologists at home. No? Ex meaning a particular, let's say, presidential candidate. If you are an apologist for any one of them, then that is bred at home. No, that attitude is bred at home. I was wondering if you want to comment on that, and I would appreciate your thoughts.
Yes, sir. Kasi I'm always using the distinction of Louis Althusser between ideological state apparatus and repressive state apparatus in my discussion on philosophical problems and critical thinking. So in those classes, so my students there know the difference between ISA and RSA, and I'm always telling them that the family, the home, is the first and foremost ideological state apparatus. Hierarchies are formed first in the homes, and we are trained to respect always and to obey and to the home really can the home is an apparatus. It's a tool of of the the state, no, in order to advance particular values.
Hmm.
So I think Louis Althusser. I wasn't able to read the primary text of Louis Althusser, but I think he would mention also the home as an ideological state apparatus.
Yeah. Maybe that's probably why he had a quarrel with his wife, resulting in to, diba, alam niyo naman yun, that he murdered his wife, si Althusser. Anyway, that's a different that's a different anecdotal yung. But pero talking about values, Franz, talking about values, yung nabanggit mong metric society or metric mentality, or you actually expressed it in different ways. Yung banking system actually also happens at home. Kasi and the school or the university only parang enhances it, no? Make it more worse, no? But doon natin unang naririnig yung galingan mo yung exam mo, di ba? Sa mga magulang natin, di ba? Dapat nasa top 10 ka lagi. Pag wala ka sa top 10, hindi ka namin bibilhan ng bagong sapatos.
Okay.
Yung ganung di ba? Motivation. So early on, our children in the Philippines are being motivated. Maybe not only in the Philippines, no? Pero children are motivated to be yung competitive, no? While we were brought up in that competitive brought up to imbibe that competitive mentality, rarely did our parents, hindi ko naman nila lahat, pero in general na lang, no? Rarely were we taught about for example, teamwork, or yung pagpapakumbaba, di ba? Rarely were we taught about that. Yung mga ganung yung mga pagpapakumbaba, yung laging galingan mo, dapat talunin mo yung mga kaklase mo, top 10 ka dapat, top 5, yan, di ba? So sa ano pa lang, sa family pa lang, sa bahay pa lang, nag-uumpisa na yung ganung mentalidad. Salamat, Franz.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Sir Pao. Short reaction lang siguro. Number one, yung I highlight here, kasi ito yung natutuwa ako kasi it's a kind of discovery na that I'm trying to coin here a new concept, yung ideological school apparatus. So coming, of course, from the ideological state apparatus. So the school itself is a small state. So it's a replica of what's happening in the society. So the school is a state, and they have their own set of repressive school apparatuses and ideological state apparatuses. And the grade happens to be both a repressive and an ideological state apparatus. Para siyang kumbaga do sa ideological state apparatus ni Louis Althusser, yung police, saka yung mga batas, saka yung prison cell, yun ang repressive. Pero yung ideological, edi yung school. Pero dito yung grade nakikita ko, the grade is both repressive and ideological. So I will try to elaborate on this siguro dun sa paper. So sabi ko, natutuwa ako sa it's a kind of discovery. But then another thing, dun sa sinasabi mo, sir, I think I learned a lot from that na kasi ang aking dito, ang aking how do you call that, assumption is that Arithmomania doesn't start from the home. Pero you are presenting here a new insight, so I'll try to look at it Kasi sabi ko nga dito, no normal child thinks first about an impending competition for ranking with their seatmates. That's my assumption. Pero kasi ang iniisip ko sa bahay naman, wala naman. Pag nakagawa ka naman ng mabuti, hindi ka naman gigradean. Eh. Wala namang, parang gano'n. Under normal circumstances, I'm talking about normal circumstances inside the homes, that parents would not grade you, will not do some tallies of walang numerical, So it's
Pero ano rin, Franz, just to parang comment din dyan, baka ano pa, kasi maganda yung sinasabi mo eh. Pero sa tingin ko, it doesn't have to be in the form of numbers.
Yeah, okay.
We're also familiar with cases of para pang yung favoritism, no? Ano rin yun? Gaming system din yun.
Okay.
So even if they are not graded using numbers, they are still graded. Kaya it also creates that yung it has a psychological effect on the behavior of the siblings.
Okay. Yeah.
So it creates a hierarchy, or minsan reverse hierarchy, mas paborito yung mas bata, or mas paborito yung mas magaling sa eskwelahan, yung mga ganun ba, yung laging nagtatop. Maski na hindi siya hindi siya graded, I think it breeds the same mentality. Pero I agree with you na the natural state, kids don't have that propensity to grade or to, diba? Pero yun nga, it's the system, no, that changes that changes them, and it starts in the family. It starts with the values that we teach our children.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Doc Pao. No, I think in education they call it the games of the schools. No? And everyone plays it, not just students, but also teachers. Probably we can entertain one more question and a quick response from Doc Franz. And the question is from Alvin Tan, Sir Alvin. Hi, Doc. Is it possible to live in and be taught in a school without standardized evaluations, particularly in a religious institution?
Please repeat the question, Sir Eric.
The question of Sir Alvin is it possible to live in and be taught in a school without standardized evaluations, particularly in a religious institution?
Ang aking short answer dyan, yes. It's possible. I think we can cite institutions that are, hindi naman talaga yung totally na walang grading, pero I mean, they are trying to make it secondary in their system. That grade is not the essence of schooling. So there are many systems existing in the world today that make grading and the numbers secondary or of lesser importance. In fact, we can practice it. You can do it. You can game the system as well if you are just critical enough and creative enough. You simply start by saying that yung message, you communicate to the students that grades don't matter at all. That means all of you will get high grades, and then they will stop thinking about grades and they would start thinking about education. Ganun lang yun. Parang gaming din yan eh. So kasi we cannot do away with the system. E di, kung alam ng mga bata na mataas magbigay ng grade yan si Cortez, o di, tapos na. Pag-usapan na natin ang tunay na buhay. I mean, yung mga lesson na talaga. Kasi alam nyo namang mataas ang makukuha yung grade sa akin. Eh. So now we can start to talk about things that matter. And that's our topic. And I'm interested in what you'll say. And you know that you will get high grades. So what's the point of thinking about the grades? Let's not be obsessed with the grades. We can, yun lang, mga ganun, mga simpleng, we can be creative in doing it inside the system that doesn't allow us. But I know for a fact that there are existing systems that do not prioritize. They do not, of course, we cannot do away. I told in the final, remarks that we cannot do away with numbers. In fact, they are good. They have emancipatory potential. We need to measure things. No, even Jerry Mueller in that book Tyranny of Metrics said that great measuring is important, but there are things that are there are important things that need not be measured. Sabi ni Mueller, hindi verbatim yung akin, but
Yeah.
something like that.
I think what he said, Franz, is the more important things need not be measured.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, thank you for that, Sir Paul. So, yun lang, yun ang a long answer to the question of Sir Alvin. The short answer is yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Franz, and thank you so much, Sir Alvin, for that question. If there are more questions for Sir Franz and his work, you can just probably send him a direct message. And once again, thank you. That was a very nice presentation, very good presentation, Doc Franz. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Okay, this particular juncture, now let us welcome the final presenter for our work in progress for the month of November. He's none other than Dr. R.T. Pada, and his paper is entitled New Forms of Fascism.
Thank you very much. I don't have any presentation. It's a very short series of notes that I've already collected throughout my research, and I'm just going to read them. And just to give you a context, this paper, of course, covers the idea of fascism under the light of new and emerging technologies, as well as, of course, the current ubiquity of its use. So to be very specific, certain social media platforms. So I draw my inspiration for this paper, of course, with the constant use of the word fascist to denote an opposition with a group or personal stance on socio-political issues. So what my paper does is it inspects how contemporary social practices generate these groups or fascists or bundles to the point of critical mass. So with the intention in mind, I'd like to, of course, direct our initial discussion on the original idea of fascism coming from the doctrine of fascism by Giovanni Gentile and Benito Mussolini. So I tried looking for an ideological basis for fascism, and the most coherent one, of course, comes from Mussolini. Okay, Hitler is awful. It was conceived by both Giovanni Gentile and Benito Mussolini. And of course, fascism is the conception of a group first or nation first ideology, which tries to transcend the political limitations of socialism and capitalism. While the Gentilian Mussolinian conception of fascism is critical of liberalism, socialism, and democracy, it remains surprisingly open to these ideologies if the emphasis on collectivism is preserved. I'll quote from Mussolini. Given that the 19th century was the century of socialism, of liberalism, and democracy, it does not necessarily follow that the 20th century must also be a century of socialism, liberalism, and democracy. Political doctrines pass, but humanities remains. And it may rather be expected that this will be a century of authority, a century of the left, a century of fascism. For if the 19th century was a century of individualism, liberalism always signifying individualism, it may be expected that this will be a century of collectivism and hence the century of the state. So it is a perfectly logical deduction that a new doctrine can utilize all these still vital elements of previous doctrines. End of quote. So what I find quite fascinating here is that there is a fundamental effort in the doctrine that resonates with other ideologies. While this is not my resounding praise or recommendation of the practice of fascism, obviously no one wants to be associated with it. It does, however, present a clearer picture of how we can understand fascism beyond the usual scope of authoritarianism, racism, and other bizarre cults of personalities. So moreover, the Gentilian Mussolinian fascism presents certain qualities that are manifested in contemporary groups. The main difference between Gentilian Mussolinian fascism and contemporary manifestations of fascism is that the figure of authority is no longer necessary to bind the fascists together. The authority might be there just to start it up, but the authority can vanish. The authority can be simply a figurehead for an ideology. And of course, that kind of imagery is quite disturbing. It brings to mind things like a Milgram experiment without the man in the lab coat, or the Stanford prison experiment without a warden. So it's a concept that I've been trying to explore in my current work. So the key ingredient in this contemporary form of fascism is the emergence of new and unrealized consequences of technologies in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So the general ubiquity and necessity of technologies, ranging from devices that are constantly connected to the internet to social networks that are managed by an efficient algorithm. And these technologies, of course, create a fertile ground for cultivating fasces or groups without resorting to authority figures to control or dictate the goal or the objective of the group. While an authority or a figurehead might be involved in the process, they are no longer necessary for the organization of the groups or fasces. The way that these groups or fasces are organized is completely autonomous. They are neither coerced nor forced to congregate into an ideological singularity. Through social networks, this behavior is amplified and encouraged by automated algorithms whose designed purpose is to maximize user engagement and maximize advertising exposure. So the effects of these automated systems is very divisive. Following basic behavioral principles, users will be encouraged to avoid negative engagements with other users and seek positive and affirmative engagements with like-minded users, which generates a tribal effect. That if you don't belong to this tribe, you're already an opponent. If you don't belong to any of the tribes, then you are also an opponent of all of the tribes. So parties or fasces are encouraged to band together and engage their enemies to advance their cause, whatever that might be. And this provides plenty of opportunities for social networks to monetize this behavior by encouraging conflict and maximizing user engagement. So engagement will in turn generate more income to the social network through advertising, and at the same time fulfill the needs of its users to reinforce their tribal affinity and combat and fend off their enemies. And I'm reminded, of course, of an acronym by a technologist, someone who has been working in the inside of all these platforms. Jaron Lanier would call them BOMER, and BOMER stands for behaviors of users modified and made into an empire for rent. And we do see that phenomena today, okay? Particularly with the upcoming election. A lot of these candidates are already using these platforms, and pretty much the platforms are amoral, okay? Amoral in a sense that they're not going to influence it in a way that is going to compromise their bottom line, which is profit. Now, certain nuances, of course, are omitted in this simplification of contemporary fasces, and this is something that I intend in the to do in the succeeding sections of my research. And to further elaborate on the contemporary form of fascism, my discussion is going to be divided into 3 sections. And the first section of my paper will be devoted to the discussion of fascism in the context of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And in that section, of course, I will discuss the technological, political, and economic underpinning of fascism that is enabled by the protected status of private institutions and disempowered government institutions. So that's the difference. Now, if we're going to look into the nitty-gritty of free speech, these platforms are private institutions, and in a way they're protected, unlike, of course, government institutions, which are more open to criticism or even ridicule. Now, I also include, of course, a discussion of anomie or amorality, okay, that guides the behavior of private institutions involved in social networks. For the second section of my paper, I would cover issues involving the automation of phases or groups, how automated systems can create ideological tribal groups, and how algorithms react to the interests and engagements of their users. And the third section of the paper, of course, will involve some of the nuances that revolve around the curation of phases, such as the utilization of artificial users, bots, and bots to influence the trajectories of automated systems. And of course, this results into a homogenization of choices in these social networks. Finally, as a conclusion that I'm intending to do in this paper, I'd be going back to Hornet's sixth condition of social integration that we see in Freedom's Right. And to quote Hornet, of course, the sixth condition is that the members of society who supplement each other in their communicative exchange of views must feel that the products of their formation are effective enough to be practiced in social reality. So this is a condition that is, of course, exploited by these media platforms, which, of course, quoting Lanier, he refers to them as bomber. Okay. Why? Because it provides an immediate feedback to provide the illusion that any form of communicative exchange is worthy of practice in social reality. What would be a good example? Likes, for example, followers, for example. And with the condition of social media platforms where users can be fake, okay, and the perusal of communication is very minimal, the proliferation of these groups occurs at a very rapid pace. So while the responsibility of allowing these group mentalities to thrive lies with the social media or bomber platforms, I think that the possibility of this continued proliferation lies with the users themselves. So if anything, it's not simply just the fault of the social media platforms, it's also the fault of the users for not being able to recognize this kind of behavior. And as long as users continue to provide bomber platforms with content, the system will continue to thrive and sell out to interested parties for the right price, which is very, on a personal note, it's a very gloomy outcome. Okay, some of these platforms have been so integrated with all the things that we do to the point that it's very difficult not to get rid of them. Okay, or to stop using them, or to stop consuming any of the products that it creates. So anyway, at least that's that's the outlook of my paper. I'm currently waiting for some of my materials. I'm of course reading Jaron Lanier's work. I'm also looking into Emile Durkheim's concept of anomy. I've been looking into some of the concepts of fascism, particularly in Adorno's authoritarian personality. But of course, I found the entire premise problematic, mainly because there's this kind of irony that I find interesting in that work, that Adorno was willing to identify, okay, or to create identities, or to point certain qualities into authoritarianism. And of course, his justification could be something that is valid in his own milieu. Okay, but the problem here is that of course he's willing to create a kind of identity politics just to pursue that kind of how would you say this, revenge against the Nazi. Okay, and the problem that I saw with that material also is that it relies entirely on the premise that there is an authoritarian personality involved. And the problem is that it doesn't mesh with the initial idea that I'm working on, particularly because it looks into that phenomena where there is no need for an authoritarian personality. Other materials that I've also been perusing, I've been looking into the works of Philip Zimbardo, okay, a psychologist, and I'll start. I'll start writing on the paper as soon as some of my books arrive. They haven't arrived. Okay, so thank you very much for everyone's time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Artipada. Now let's
Mm.
listen to Dr. Paolo Bolaños.
Salamat. Ako na naman, no? Pasensya na kayo. Nagsasawa na kayo sa akin. Artie, thank you for your presentation. I'm very interested in it. Of course, I want to read the final output.
Mhm.
Just a couple of things, no. First, what you're doing to me, no, although you are quite critical of Adorno's work, actually, it's not Adorno per se, yung
Alone,
authoritarian
yeah.
personality. The truth about it is that it was an empirical work or empirical research that he just had to participate in.
Mhm.
In order to parang katulad din sa atin na naghahanap ng he did this when they transferred to the United States, no.
Mhm.
And in order to secure funding and a place in the institute, that he had to collaborate with other people like psychologists and economists and so on, no? But I don't know if we can identify Adorno's critique of fascism or authoritarianism simply based on the authoritarian personality. Anyway, just to point, I think the argument there, if there's an argument in the authoritarian personality, and you might be correct, but that's also part of my question, no, or clarification.
Mm.
Because in the authoritarian personality, what he's arguing together with his co-researchers is that it's very similar to what you're saying. Hitler arose not because of Hitler, but because of because of the support that he gained from the people around him, and also the people, and also the German citizens, no? Without this support, Hitler would have not been successful. The National Socialists would have not really won, no. So yung authoritarian person, parang ang ina-argue nila doon parang authoritarian personalities are the fuel, no. Pero you might be, but that's so that's related to the clarification that I would like to in your study. Are you arguing that or is your presupposition, kasi yung sinabi mo kanina that an authoritarian personality is not presupposed, pero you also mentioned that netizens or people who who use social media are also partly to blame.
Yeah.
Because
Yes,
they are not aware, or they ignore, or they deny the fact that their participation in social media actually fuels that authoritarian system, no, or that authoritarian whatever system or ideology. So that's the first clarification, or the clarification I'd like to ask you. And then the second, not really question, but I'm just question na rin. I was wondering if you considered or if you've read that part of the Dialectic of Enlightenment, where Adorno and Horkheimer talk about um, the new form of fascism in capitalism. No?
Mm.
I think your argument is very similar to their argument in the dialectic of enlightenment, because when they transferred to the United States, they discovered a new form of indirect fascism or authoritarianism in the consumerist society of America, of the US. And that authoritarian, that form of fascism or authoritarianism doesn't need a figurehead like Hitler. It
Yeah,
just needs the it just takes advantage of the desire of people to consume. So I don't know if I mean it could be a take-off point for your work, no? So that's it's one of the chapters, the latter chapters of the dialectic of enlightenment. So sige,
Yeah,
Artie, thank you.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much, sir. I'd like to respond with the second question because that's the juiciest part. And yeah, I agree with Adorno in dialectic of enlightenment. In fact, it's also something that someone else, Noam Chomsky, for example, already covers in his work on what's that material? Manufacturing consent. He argues that the kind of behavior that is generated by the news media platforms, for example, creates this sense of what is canonical or what is an authority figure, okay, when it comes to the dissemination of things such as information and news, okay. And I agree, and mostly my work tries to create a much more contemporary reading of these materials, particularly in the context of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, when we are already looking at a world that is constantly interconnected, and socialization in a way becomes forced upon us. Okay, we don't have a choice to fall back or even to retreat in the solace of our own homes, because our own homes are also going to keep us connected with people. For the first part, for the first question, I think my my main argument there is that actually we have a choice of not using these platforms. Okay, and I follow the similar train of thought in Jaron Lanier's work on 10 reasons or 10 arguments why you should delete your social media account. And my argument, the argument that Lanier has there is that we ought to quit our social media accounts because they are toxic, and the kind of experience that we have in current social media platforms is not really conducive for us. And most of all, it is a very addictive type of experience. We can't let go of it. We're like drug addicts, or we're like smokers who has to quit the platform called Turkey. Okay, and the argument isn't made to abandon the possibility of having a social media platform. The argument is that we should abandon them because there might be other possibilities that can exist with social media platforms. So if we give them this kind of feedback, for example, Facebook is the most toxic one. Okay, if we abandon Facebook, someone is going to create a new form of a new type of social media platform, and that platform is going to learn from the kinds of criticisms that we have with Facebook. So the moment that you begin to remove the economic viability of the platform, it loses its teeth. Okay, it will have to either submit to the demands of its users, or it will pretty much die. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much, Sir Pao. Those are very wonderful comments.
Thank you, Artie.
Thank you so much, Doc Pao and Doc Artie. I think we can accommodate one more comment or
Yeah,
one more
done.
question for Doc Artie.
Yeah, Dan, I'll read it. Hi, Rick. Yeah, agree with you, Doc, with your take on the bomber is not only the problem, contrary to what Lanier says. The responsibility also lies with the users. I hope I could read your work po, since I'm also planning to do my thesis along Lanier's digital reification. Yeah, Dan is a student in my class. Okay, its effects on identity formation and perhaps connected to understand it under the lens of Honneth and finally offer a mitigation. So yeah, if I'm looking towards rereading Habermas too, okay, but I think that's already taking a very circuitous path. Honneth already presents a very good diagnosis of this type of situation, and it's surprising that for despite Honneth's age, that he somehow grasps the idea of the kind of problems that we have with socialization. So I recommend going through Honneth's Freedom's Right. He already covers some of the diagnosis that I'm making here. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Sir RT, for those comments. And I think it was a direct message. I think it was a direct message coming from one of his students. No, I think. Okay, I think we're done, Dr. Pada. If ever you
Thank
have
you.
some questions or comments on the work of Dr. RT Pada, you can just again send him a direct message so that you can talk about it and inquire about his work on Fascism. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doc RT Pada. And that concludes our work in progress for the month of November. Again, congratulations to Sir MJ, Sir Beljun, Dr. Franz, and Dr. RT Pada. We hope to see you again on the next edition of our work in progress for the month of December. Again, thank you so much for being with us. Have a great afternoon and have a great weekend. Thank you.